What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we are going over the must-own running back sleepers of the 2020 season. Keep in mind, with sleepers, of course, their path to fantasy success is going to be more of an uphill one. In turn, you're not really paying much for them. You can find them at the tail end of the draft. So typically, we are shooting for maximum upside. We don't really care about the floor. The goal is to take bets on players that have a realistic pathway to being a fantasy starter on your team if certain things do go their way. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day: which running back faced the least amount of stacked boxes in 2019? The correct answer, Devin Singletary. Congratulations, Chris Vaughn. You got this one right. Let's see who can get today's question right. Which tight end led the league in yards after catch per reception? Once again, that's which tight end led the league in yards after catch per reception. Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Also, guys, if you're interested in purchasing our draft package, more information can be found on that at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that, as always, in the description box below. But that's enough about that. Let's get right into the video. And the first running back sleeper we have is a familiar name. It's Chase Edmonds of the Arizona Cardinals. If you followed the channel last offseason, you would know that we were high on Chase Edmonds going into the 2019 fantasy draft, and a lot of the same reasons that we liked him then are why we're high on Edmonds once again for the 2020 fantasy season. It's always going to be a good choice to get pieces that are around Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray, who now have even more upside than they did in the rookie season because they're coming into year two. In year one, we did see them very successful and the pieces around them be very profitable for those who own them on their fantasy team. We know Kenyon Drake finished the season as the running back 16 after transitioning to that team halfway through the season and knowing absolutely nothing about the offense heading into it. This season, though, there's no David Johnson. Kenyon Drake is expected to man the majority of the workload out of the backfield and in the receiving game at the running back position, but Chase Edmonds is going to be next in line for those opportunities. We did see flashes of excellence from Chase Edmonds in 2019. There was a 3-game stretch in which Edmonds actually was a viable fantasy asset, and in week 7 against the Giants, he completely popped off given the entire workload, 27 rushes out of the backfield, another 4 receptions through the air, and he made the most of it. 150 total yards and 3 total touchdowns. So that shows us that if Chase Edmonds is given the reins in this backfield, he can be successful. Unfortunately, he was hit with the injury bug. While he did appear in 13 games, when he did return to action after missing 4 straight games, the need for use of him wasn't as high either. Of course, they traded for Kenyon Drake. David Johnson's still on the roster, not yet traded. So while the team had a choice of Johnson, Drake, or Edmonds, clearly Edmonds was the third option out of those 3. So we never really saw Edmonds get any significant volume post-injury. He had 2 games in which he saw 0 touches and no game where he had over 3 touches. So his involvement completely non-existent. But with David Johnson now out of town, he should be second in line for targets and touches behind Drake. Drake, who we've been very transparent about us liking heavily for this upcoming season, being one of the better values in the early rounds at the running back position. The offense itself also has more upside, not only for being year 2 with Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury working together, but also because they added one of the best wide receivers in the entire league, DeAndre Hopkins. They already had a pretty capable wide receiving core when you consider that they have Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk. While Larry Fitzgerald, not the same type of player he was in years past, is perfect for a smaller role, someone who can be relied on with his very reliable hands. Then Christian Kirk, always a threat to take it to the house, big play specialist, somebody who may even thrive with reduced coverage, something we can guarantee happens now that DeAndre Hopkins is a receiver on this team. One last unknown factor for Drake is that we're not sure if he can handle a full workload. At least he hasn't been given one since entering the NFL. Last season, when you combine his touches on Miami as well as Arizona, those were the most touches he had seen throughout his entire career, which still weren't that high, just over 200 total touches in 2019. Is that to say that Kenyon Drake can't handle a full workload? No, we just haven't seen it at this point. And if Miami did know something that we didn't know, and that may be why they were limiting the overall touches, and Drake does end up getting injured, the main beneficiary in that scenario is none other than Chase Edmonds. So guys, just to summarize, you have a player on an ascending offense that added one of the best offensive pieces in DeAndre Hopkins, which should lead to even more scoring opportunities. Chase Edmonds himself, when given the full workload a season ago, did prove that he can post running back one type of numbers, and the running back ahead of him hasn't yet proven he can handle a full workload for an entire season. So for us, it's a no-brainer that Chase Edmonds is one of the best sleepers in the late stages of the draft. Currently, he can be drafted as the running back 54, which is extremely cheap when you factor in that if all things go his way, he can have league-winning type of upside. The next running back sleeper we have is Zack Moss of the Buffalo Bills, and unlike a handcuff, Zack Moss is somebody we can see who throughout the entire season could compete for targets and touches without an injury to the running back ahead of him. The running back ahead of him is Devin Singletary, who did show flashes last season, leaving people to be excited for the potential production for him in the 2020 season. Truth be told though, Zack Moss is a player who can do a lot of the same things that Devin Singletary excels in, that being the between the 20s type of work, while also competing for that valuable red zone role, an area where Devin Singletary saw very little usage in 2019, producing just 26.5% of the overall touches for Buffalo in that area of the field in 2019. The draft capital invested in both players is very similar: 77th overall pick for Singletary, 86th overall pick for Zack Moss, both selections in the third round. Key indicators are always to follow the money, follow where the investments are in the draft, and investing a similar pick in Zack Moss from a price perspective of what you paid for Devin Singletary indicates Zack Moss has just as much of a chance to be a contributor in this offense. And with Frank Gore now out of town, Zack Moss is a player who should see immediate opportunity. Devin Singletary, of course, we do have projected out as leading this backfield, but would it surprise anyone to see a transition if we're seeing Devin Singletary struggle in areas where Zack Moss is shining in? And with a frame of 5'9", 223, compare that to Devin Singletary's 5'7", 203-pound frame, and you can easily see a scenario in which Moss leads this team in red zone snaps from the running back position, while also chipping away at Devin Singletary's production between the 20s. Essentially, this pick is not only a sleeper pick, but a value pick because it's somebody who has the ability to produce for your team early, who could potentially have a flex starter type of role right out of the gate. And you compare the running back ahead of him is being drafted as a back-end RB2. Meanwhile, Zack Moss can be drafted in the 11th round. For us, it's easy to see that this player is undervalued. We could see this ADP creep up and the difference in gap between Singletary and Moss shrink as we approach the fantasy draft. But for right now, Zack Moss can be drafted as the running back 47, making him a very valuable sleeper in the later rounds of the 2020 draft. The next running back sleeper we have is Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys, and when looking for a sleeper, it's hard to find better examples than Tony Pollard himself. I understand a lot of people aren't in the market for Tony Pollard because there's no potential way he could overtake Zeke so long as Zeke is healthy, but in that area, when you're comparing handcuff to handcuff, it's hard to find a better option than Tony Pollard. Simply put, Pollard passes the eye test in every way imaginable. He can catch, he can run, he caught 15 of 20 targets in 2019, rushed for 5.3 yards per carry, and in limited work, that being 101 total touches, he still was able to reach pay dirt on 3 separate occasions. So overall, he is a very well-rounded player in one of the best potential offenses of the entire NFL. Dak Prescott is currently being drafted as the quarterback 4 on most boards. Amari Cooper, a back-end wide receiver 1 by most projections. You have Michael Gallup, who despite missing games last season was still able to compile over 1,100 receiving yards, and they invested a first-round pick into CeeDee Lamb, who we absolutely adore this season as well. So there's virtually zero chance that these offenses will easily be able to stack the box without having to pay for it through the receiving game. You're going to be hard-pressed to find valuable fantasy outputs while Ezekiel Elliott is healthy, so this is definitely a player who's going to ride the bench, whose upside we won't really see other than glimpses while Ezekiel Elliott is healthy. But if you have an extra roster spot and you want game-changing type of upside, if Tony Pollard does get the reins of this backfield and is getting an Ezekiel Elliott type of workload, that's guaranteed RB1 production out of a player you're drafting in the double-digit rounds. Currently, Tony Pollard can be drafted for an investment of 137th overall, an 11th round pick, which seems like a small investment for any Zeke owners worried about losing their bona fide RB1, or players who have already filled out their running back positions with guaranteed volume and are looking for a player who could completely dominate if they ever saw the opportunity go their way. So for us, Tony Pollard is definitely a player that we're looking for in the late stages of the draft, and while he may not be a player who's putting up 5, 10, maybe 15 points consistently who we're worried about starting, he's still a player that we want to stash on our bench who could be a complete game changer if things go his way. The next player on this list is Anthony McFarland of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if you don't want to draft a handcuff, you do want a player who's going to have the opportunity to compete early and often, then look no further than Anthony McFarland. James Conner and Benny Snell, they haven't done enough to prove to this offense and prove to the coaching staff that they are the guys. The coaching staff has been very hesitant about naming which players are going to have the most involvement in the offense. As it stands today, James Conner will lead this team from rushing and receiving, at least right out of the gate. Benny Snell does have the tools to compete for both of those roles as well, but let's be frank, Benny Snell was a bit underwhelming. 3.9 yards per carry on the ground last season. While capable to receive out of the backfield, he did only get 4 targets throughout the entire season last year, so a very prominent role in the receiving game should be up for grabs, even outside of James Conner, who by all means last season, while healthy, had a phenomenal catch rate. We just haven't seen him stay healthy for a full season. The amount of games he's appeared in has decreased each of the past 3 seasons, and when comparing the production we were accustomed to seeing in 2018, his 2019 campaign was very underwhelming even while he was healthy and on the field. The result is, the competition for targets and touches in this backfield is open. If any one rusher or receiver on this team is able to go out there and produce consistently, we're going to see more opportunities fed their way. This is an offense, of course, that should see vast improvements from 2019 to 2020. We're expecting Deontay Johnson to take a step forward. Not only was Big Ben injured last season, but also Juju Smith-Schuster was banged up for essentially the entire season. Even if he did see snaps and was on the field, seeing him fully healthy and available was a sight we were not accustomed to. With this offense potentially firing on all cylinders, or at least the best we'd seen it for a couple of seasons, the opportunity for fantasy success out of this backfield is going to be higher than what we saw last season, making this a valuable backfield to target. Anthony McFarland is currently coming off the board as the cheapest of the running backs of these 3, and with his versatility, offers a lot of upside for his potential role in this offense. The final player on this list is Boston Scott of the Philadelphia Eagles, and truth be told, this is going to hinge on the outcome of who they add in free agency. The Eagles have been very vocal about wanting to get in another veteran rusher who could compete to be second on this team in targets and touches out of the backfield. Currently, that position and role is Boston Scott's to lose. Boston Scott's the type of player who doesn't need a lot of volume in order to be successful for fantasy. His skill set more similarly matches a player like Tariq Cohen than that of a 3-down rusher. Scott stands at 5'6", 203 pounds, but he's an electrifying talent, a player who can make the most of a limited opportunity. An opportunity that has the chance to not be very limited in the 2020 season, especially if he plays second fiddle to Miles Sanders. The Eagles heavily utilized him towards the tail end of last season. Through the final 4 games of the season, Boston Scott saw no fewer than 6 targets, and to his credit, caught 23 of 25 total targets that went his way. So when given the opportunity, he looked good. Week 17, he had 84 receiving yards. Week 14, he had 69 receiving yards. And while yes, he's on the smaller side for a rusher, when given the opportunity on his 61 attempts, he still was able to manage 4 yards per carry in that area, an area which is one of his weaker points. As it stands today, though, we do have to take somewhat of a wait and see approach when it comes to Boston Scott, because the impact of his fantasy value is going to change depending on which veteran running back does sign with the team. If it's a more first and second down bruiser, his role in the offense should remain somewhat unchanged, still potentially having that receiving upside in this offense. But if they sign a player who is well versed in the receiving game, our rankings may adjust and we may lower him and deem him potentially as a weaker sleeper in this range. But right now, you can get him virtually free. Even with nobody really competing for targets and touches outside of Miles Sanders, he's still the running back 50. That doesn't make sense for a player who should have immediate value. I could understand this ranking if they did bring in a first and second down bruiser, but as it stands today, that's just not the case. So for us, Boston Scott is definitely somebody to keep an eye on. Depending on who they sign and bring in, that could impact his overall fantasy value. But for right now, the running back 50, that's a steal. And it's exactly why Boston Scott makes our list of must-own running back sleepers of the 2020 season. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.